to take notes. We do have the note-taking tool if people would like to use that. It's helpful and you can get some crowdsourced support. On the other hand, I know some people prefer to not type in public, so we'll take our notes in any form we can get them. And it's go time.
And it is. So let's get started. This is the STIR session. It's Friday, last session. We seem to keep getting this slot. So whatever, here we go. The note well, by this point in the week, I hope you've all well aware of it. This is the rights and responsibilities for participating. So please make sure you're aware of it before you contribute. In addition, please follow the IETF code of conduct. Basically, we're asking for respectful and courteous contributions and make sure that we're having impersonal discussions. The agenda today is connected identity, followed by error handling, followed by rich call data, followed by messaging. If there's any agenda bashes, please come to the microphone now.
Here's a slight one. We might want to have maybe during our administrivia a very quick nod towards our supposed charter update.
Yes. Actually, I've lost track. Why don't you handle that?
You want that now, or
yes?
Finish these. Okay. So
this was the last one.
Okay. So the chairs had agreed in. I see Jonathan Q, but I'll say real quick: the chairs had agreed at the last IETF meeting that we were to discuss this charter update. We had some proposed text from John, and we were going to discuss it with Murray. We appear to have dropped the ball on that. So I had an email exchange with Murray last night, and he is okay with the wording that's presented. I want to hear what John has to say, but I was going to propose that maybe we recirculate that on the mailing list in the next week and get people a real quick check on it, and then we pass that back to Murray to execute. And John?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we, I did have a slide about this in the connected identity thing, because really connected identity is the thing that's actually waiting on this. So like we can go over the little bit of the charter relevant to connected identity for that, but I'm happy to send the proposed charter text to the list, or if the chairs would prefer to do it, I think you have it. Either way works for me.
That sounds good, and I think, Russ, are we ready to switch over?
I would suggest that Murray start processing the suggested text immediately. He can keep an eye on any working group feedback as part of that processing.
Not sure if Murray is with us, but otherwise we can close the loop with him later today.
Yep. Hi, I'm on mobile, so I'm doing my best to listen in. But yes, I'm around. Sync up with me.
Okay.
All right, that sounds good. So we'll move to the first presentation. John or Chris, which one's presenting?
I think I'll do connected identity. Since I mean there isn't a lot to update us on this, so let me see if I can figure out. So I'm supposed to share the slides myself through the meeting materials, or how does that work?
You can now do that.
All right, let me see.
So you click the little paper-looking icon.
This not working?
The share preloaded slides icon.
Tried it. I unfortunately seem to have just like spawned the slides as a Let me see. Share
It's under your
preloaded.
name, second from the left icon under your name.
Oh, I see. Got it.
And then we have to approve it, I guess, right?
Yeah, once it,
I did.
Okay.
Okay.
Guys,
Yay.
this is Murray again. I can't unmute. I can't turn my audio off and mute echo, so I'm just going to mute locally. You can ignore me in the queue.
Okay, is this actually sharing now?
Yes.
Because I can't actually see it.
We see that your slide's just fine.
All right, let me. Ah, there we go. Okay, I got it. Perfect. This is my first time using this one, so my apologies for that. So yeah, as you can see from the markup at the bottom of this is kind of gotten kicked down the can a couple of times. We've run out of time every time, which it was why I assume, even though this is not a working group item, we're actually discussing this first this time. So what is this again? If you're just coming in fresh, or it's been so long that you don't recall. So this is revisiting John Elwell's old RFC 4916, which addressed, back when the identity header was described in RFC 4474, like what you did about responses, or what you did about like kind of figuring out who it is you ended up connecting up to when you place an invite, the way that we've described the identity header in RFC 8224. Although it's pretty generic to any SIP methods, practically speaking, it is being used for invite, and it doesn't say anything about what you're supposed to do for anything in the backwards direction. Why this is particularly interesting, there are a couple of either mid-dialogue or dialogue terminating request potential vulnerabilities to SIP communications overall. And I've heard about some of these, for example, in the GSMA, about short stopping, where there's an intermediary network that is kind of synthesizing buys to one side and not to the other in order to do arbitrage. There's like a whole bunch of like weird, toll avoidance or billing maximization attacks that people are concerned about, and even just like route hijacking, given how really, it's often a matter of provisioning, I'd say, rather than consulting any authoritative database, how the destinations of SIP calls ultimately terminate on the internet. Be great if we had some stronger assurance that things have landed in the place that they're supposed to do. Problem, of course, is that all this does take stir quite far past the threat model of RFC 7375, which is primarily focused on eliminating nuisance calling and a set of related things like voicemail hacking and swatting and so on. Anything that really is looking at this more bidirectionally is going to be a bit more complicated, which is why we need a charter update to pass it. So I said there's no new version, right? This has kind of been backburnered since we started having this for charter discussion. And we have been kind of punting on this the last couple of times that we've gotten together. The last iteration mostly focused on this pre-call case, which is really interesting to me, the medialess dialogue that can be established in order to allow the connected side to reveal to the original caller who they are, and to be able to prove that cryptographically with stir. That much said, there's plenty to do here. Like the, we had a discussion, I think it was at the interim actually, or maybe it was at 111, I don't remember, about what some of the privacy implications of this are, because there are definitely some risks about data collection. If you can just kind of form a medialess dialogue with some endpoint, you could well imagine somebody trying to do that on a mass scale just to ascertain what's supposed to be on the other side of a given telephone number. So we're pretty concerned about that. So interaction with anonymity, I think, is another thing. I think that's probably easier to resolve because we do have so much text about anonymous communications associated with stir already. But there will be some privacy considerations that are specific to this particular use case. There's also been a lot of discussion, and this is something that I've thought about quite a bit, about having some kind of directory that would allow people to look up prior to a call whether they should expect connected identity from this destination. And this is something that is really salient to a set of high-risk use cases like healthcare, government, emergency services, things like that, where it might be handy for there to be some place that implementations could look to know that if they're not getting connected identity, like from their bank, they're supposed to. And in the absence of that, especially as this is going to be an incremental mechanism that's being built on top of the existing stir-shaken infrastructure, that seems like a really valuable property to have. I don't know if we're going to articulate it in this draft. I think that service is orthogonal, in terms of exactly, certainly all this works and can be specified at a protocol level without the existence of that service. So I imagine that'll be like an add-on that we'll look at for this later. But nonetheless, that's something that I know a lot of people are interested in. And then there's just a lot of like busy work, and this is the stuff I didn't really want to do until I was confident that the working group wants to do this draft, revising the examples. We'll have those generated from our implementations. Chris and I will, so that those will have the same things that John Elwell's original 4916 had, good protocol breakdowns so that implementers know what they're supposed to do. And there may be, especially coming out of SIP Brandy and some of the things that we did for that, some actual normative revisions to 4916. One of the obvious ones is the elimination of the identity info header, which the 4916 examples assume. So there's stuff like that is on the roadmap for this. And so, yeah, still plenty to do. We need to think about it. And really, the question before the group for the past couple meetings has been adoption, pending, of course, the recharter. And I did have one slide that just kind of shows what the charter text would be that is salient to this, that goes beyond what STIR's original scope was. And this is really opening up mechanisms that identify the called party, how that the called party reached the calling party, and then similar use cases related to fraud and security that fall under that rubric. And so really, yeah, just take a look at the charter text. It'll be circulated on the list in front of Murray. And if it all seems good, then we will adopt and start filling in the many gaps that we know we have in this one. Any questions, comments? I should bring the chat up. I don't see any chat, comments, any thoughts. Anybody come to the conclusion this is a terrible idea? Hearing none, then I guess we will proceed with the next steps as articulated there. And with that, I will take these slides down and we can move on to the next thing.
There are some, it looks good to me, and +1s popping up in the chat.
Yeah, I'm seeing those. Yeah, yeah.
This is Murray, and the diff charter text I think I saw looked like a great starting point.
Fantastic. Yeah, let me know if there's anything more we need to patch in.
Does anyone want to argue that we shouldn't adopt this work?
And yeah, I mean, I will say, I'm aware that this is going to be a lift in terms of where STIR-shaken is today. This is like STIR-shaken 2.0 kind of stuff, right? And so, but I mean, there are just so many use cases. As STIR-shaken has now been rolled out, mandates are passed here in the US and so on. We're getting to a point now where more people are going to try to repurpose it for these broad use cases. I see this more and more, and that just is going to require protocol level support that we did not anticipate when we did the original 8224 and so on.
We have Jack in the queue.
Jack in the queue, what's up, Jack?
Hi, yeah, so I feel like my opinion on this is that this is quite neat. I quite like the idea. My only hesitation is that it's quite a lot, like it's quite a big change, and it's a reasonable amount of work to do all of it and get it all adopted and working. And I'd like to be a bit more confident that people are actually going to find use of it, like, because it would be quite easy to standardize something like this and just no one ends up using it. But also it's quite cool, so maybe they will just use it. But I don't really know. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, I do recognize it's a lift. I think the motivation for that lift is going to come from these silos that actually require it, right? this is something that if emergency services requires this, if like big banks, big powerful enterprises that have a lot of leverage with carriers and thus with carrier vendors require it, government agencies require it so that we can stop some of these IRS scams and things like that. I mean, the actual drive for it will have to come from them. And I think that's the only thing that will really make the vendors move the needle on this.
I want to promote a comment that Robert made in the chat into the audio, which is, we've talked about this before. We've pretty much agreed to go do this in previous conversations. So we're kind of taking a check on that now, but unless someone has some strong opinion that we should change our path, we've
Fair enough. Yep.
Mitch already committed to do this. We were just waiting for the charter. So let's get that done.
Sounds good. With that, I will get out of the video.
Okay, Chris. Nope, you're still muted. Are you locally muted too?
I don't see that he had grabbed the audio.
Well, he's gone now.
Should we switch over to whatever John had next and then come back?
Well, he's still here. There he is.
I rejoined. Am I good now?
Ah, yes.
Browser issue.
Okay. You want to share your own slides?
Sure. You see that?
It's good.
Good. Okay. I've updated the identity header error handling draft, still individual at this point. But in the interim meeting, we had another great discussion. And I think the major outcome of that discussion was that we would switch from SIP as a protocol reason code and define a new STIR reason code, both from the perspective of use multiple, if you get multiple reason headers and formally define that, although Robert has offered to author a separate SIP core document that explicitly adds that to extend the 3261 definition. But also we thought that was a good path forward to separate STIR specific reason codes, because we do have a little bit of explicit ways that we use that, both in IETF context and also with STIR shaken. There's text specific to that in the shaken standards. So I just included this, and really the only change we're proposing here is STIR, but that did actually create a bunch of changes in the document to set the context for those things. So a lot of changes in the document, but all to say essentially the same thing. So I think hopefully we're on a pretty solid path forward now. And I think, I think we had a lot of great discussion and good collaboration and ended up in a good place on this. So, let me know if there's any questions or comments related to the changes I made, but, and if I incorporated everybody's thoughts correctly, but otherwise, hopefully we're set to move on. I'm not hearing any comments. So, Jack?
Yeah, this might actually be better just for the mailing list, but the one thing that still sticks out me is the security implications. And this might just be me not understanding how this works properly, but you have to remove the reason header as it propagates upwards just so you don't leak information.
Yeah, I had changed that to a must. Yep.
If a authentication service doesn't yet understand this spec, is it just going to end up forwarding everything up anyway? As in, are we even able to write must there because people who don't understand the spec are going to not do that?
Mm-hmm. I think there's certainly potential danger in that, although I don't think people are used to dealing with multiple, or early enough that people aren't used to, well, I guess that doesn't matter whether there's multiple or not. I guess, personally, I question how much risk there is for this situation, but I certainly understand and support the ability to strip it at the authentication service that sent that. So yeah, I think it's really up to the group whether how concerned we are about that, but I think we're still in early days enough that hopefully people catch on. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I'll have a better think about it, I think, is the answer, and raise it in the list.
There's
But
definitely
otherwise, I really like this.
Great. Yeah, there's certainly time to think about it. So yes, please think about it.
There are some please adopt comments in the chat.
Yeah, I see Brian.
And I'll ask, does anyone want to argue we shouldn't adopt this? And I'm not seeing that. And Brian's in the queue.
I mean, this is just usually when we want to do something like this, we add some kind of options mechanism that lets the downstream entity know, the upstream entity know if the downstream entity can deal with it. And maybe there's something we could do here, and then you wouldn't send it unless the other end implemented and it was prepared to handle the security stuff. It's just an idea that you could consider if you think I'm kind of with you that I don't think there's much of a problem here. But if people thought there was, we could come up with some way of knowing if the downstream entity.
Well, I think it's the other way around, that, or at least if I'm interpreting Jack's comment correctly, that the authentication service has implemented the stripping ability when they get it back. Okay. Yeah.
All right, that definition of upstream and downstream confused, but we could come up with a way to do that if that was really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So I don't think we're seeing any opposition in this room today to adopt this. I would propose we probably ought to do a call for adoption to the list very shortly. Does that sound right, Russ and Robert?
I'm taking a note.
Okay.
What you said was cut off to me.
Say again, Ben. I didn't hear that.
I was actually.
I think we'll do 3 weeks, given the time of year.
Sounds good. And apparently I was cut off telling Russ that he was cut off. Got to be slow on the.
Okay, well, I was going to prep for the next slide. Did you get a slide request? Thank you. But I also wanted to make sure we're done with, I think we were, right?
I think we're done with error handling.
Thank you. Okay. So I'll move on to the next one, RCD. I tried to, I re-listened back to the interim, which again was great conversation. So thank you all for participating. I created a pretty lengthy checklist of items to make sure I fixed in the document, and hopefully I cover them all. And I tried to enumerate them in the slides here so we can go through. There's probably a few that are hopefully are straightforward, a few that may have some more discussion points, but let's go for it. So one was a comment from Ben about JCL key being defined as an HTTPS URL, asking, do we want other URI types? Call info, RCD, the SIP core RCD draft. We don't specify that. I guess keep it sort of default. I think my opinion is that we should limit it to HTTPS URLs. So I would maybe rather just say that in the call info draft, but curious for opinions on that and whether they think there's other use cases that are applicable. Ben, you have a comment?
The use case that I had in mind was when you have something that's in another body part and you're using, what is it, a data URL scheme? Or I can't remember the scheme name. But when you have something that's actually in the message in another body part.
Yeah, I think we've talked about using that mechanism in different ways and we always went away from it, but yeah, go ahead, John.
I mean, you can use a CID URL for this to like designate the MIME body that it resides in. I mean, I think that there's always the kind of SIP purist. Do we really want to like have these MIME bodies be inserted by intermediaries potentially, right? And that's always made me a little uncomfortable about that because the use cases we're envisioning for a lot of these at least aren't ones where it's the actual originator of the invite who's going to be the one that's generating it. But we could also argue that that protocol purity ship has long since sailed. There's like absolutely no reason we should be worried about that. Like I would be fine with it being CID. I think then the question becomes like what the integrity protection properties of that are, right? And if we're concerned about that potentially being altered in transit, somebody putting advertisements or something like into a JCard as the message goes by or something like that. If we can like those things, then I think it's doable.
I think it's doable, but like, do we really think people are going to do it, or do we really think we want to recommend doing that? And it's just another implementation thing that people may have to support. That would be my concern. Go ahead, Ben.
My impression is that operators and such that are likely to actually use RCD are still really figuring out how they want to do some things. And I would be hesitant to take CID off the table just yet. Maybe they'll use it, maybe they won't. but it would be inconvenient for them to come back later and say, hey, we really wanted to use that. I guess, we can always update RFCs.
Mhm. That is a good point. Have certainly had a few conversations about, call info versus claims, both or either or which I think is an industry discussion that needs to happen also. Maybe that sort of convinces me we should do that, but who is next, Brian or John? Forget if it goes up or down. Go ahead,
I
John.
mean, yeah. I mean, so your point about the data URL is an interesting one too, because of course you could encode the entire JCard as a data URL and like embed it in, like the in the call info header itself, right? Which is ugly and appalling, and we shouldn't do that. I'm afraid that's the kind of thing people will do if we don't provide like some way for this to work a bit more responsibly. I mean, from what I can tell, I mean, I guess I understand most people that are looking at this are looking at the JCL actually being an HTTPS URL at this point. It is so early that I don't, I'm hesitant to close doors as well. I think it is very possible for us though to just say, look, here in this document, we're specifying HTTPS as like a primary mechanism and leave the door open for people to propose alternate URI schemes for this in separate extension specifications. Does that work for people?
We've been
Right.
using call info in emergencies a lot to pass information between pieces that gets added to an emergency call as it gets processed through the system. And we uniformly allow CID as well as HTTPS. And that's it. I mean, it's HTTPS or CID. You get exactly the same data. It's just, is it come in line or is it come, or it's by value or by reference? That's exactly how we describe it. You can pass it by value or reference. And what we found is people wrote that code once and they use it all over the place. And I think it's useful. I see people using by reference much more often than by value, but I also think it's useful and that just do it, allow it. CID.
So you're saying just to clarify, you are seeing people use that in use CID
less often than by value.
Right.
It's when the vendor doesn't want to when one side just doesn't want to maintain a web server that they have to allow access from folks that they don't have a lot of control over. Then they put it in by value and then it's gone. They don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Go ahead, Jack.
Isn't that exactly what JCD is, though? JCD is by value, JCL is by reference.
Good point. Okay, maybe I'll try to mention that on the list again and generate a little more discussion and think about it a little more. I'm not sure we have a clear direction, but maybe I'm sort of slightly leaning towards keeping it or adding CID, I guess, to the RCD, and I haven't been watching the chat either. Okay, let me move on to
the voice. I said the chat is fairly reflective of the voice discussion.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let me move on, make sure we cover everything. All right. So there was a couple of things around NAM and APN specific to default usage. Things about reflecting the same values in JCard, those types of comments. So I really just added, similar to NAM, that APN must be used. So there must be like if you're intending for an alternative number to be displayed, then you must include it in APN and not rely on people also, going into the JCL, and that's specific to, for supporting textual clients and things that may not want to go into the JCard or support JCard. Any comments about that? I think that's pretty consistent with the discussion. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. We talked a little bit about adding to security considerations the need for vetting. So I added some text in there. I'm not going to read through that, but it really essentially says that you should vet all identities, alternate identities, etc. Okay. Yeah, this is along the similar lines, but this is in the body of the text. So again, addressing the, we say that we're not dictating any policy in this document, but vetting is important. So next issue, fixing consistency with the rules with constraints. So I talk about in both the RCD usage and the RCDI usage, the use of permitted values, that it may contain multiple entries. I have this thing about only including permitted values, so that you have the option of having values that are required, but also not have the ability to not have an RCD claim as well. That was part of some discussion. RCDI is sort of a variant of that, but it's sort of in the opposite direction. So having an RCDI implies having RCD. So the rules are slightly different, but the concept is similar, that you must include for RCD claims sorry, just reading through this. Yeah, just trying to cover all the different permutations of must include RCD, RCDI. People can read through that and comment, unless anybody has any real-time comments for that. I think the key thing was, in my mind, was whether or not we want to explicitly include this one that allows for having either no RCD or permitted values, and whether that was an important use case. I think that was the only one that was maybe borderline in my mind, but not hearing too much feedback, so I'll move on. Yeah, so this was something we had pretty extensive discussion on. The verification of integrity, if the URL is not being used by the consumer. There was a couple of proposals that I took notes on. I think I actually shared on the list what I proposed in the text, and then obviously in the document that I uploaded, which is specifically, I added the last paragraph here. So this was sort of my compromise proposal. I got some support for that. I think maybe some question marks. Any comments that anybody wants to mention here related to this item? Jack?
I definitely don't think this is the right wording. specifically because of that third bullet existing. I just don't think that's sensible to have. And yes, I sent an email to the list with like more explanation of why I didn't think that was right. But yeah.
I mean, I guess we're sort of trying to straddle a line of, I just wonder if some of the concerns are more something part of an ecosystem that has more policies for those things that can be clarified in those ecosystems. But
yes, but this has to support that, and I don't think the way this is worded at the moment, this supports that.
Ben, you want to go?
I agree with Jack here. We had some email discussion after your, I think it was after the last revision. And I had made a proposal, but I don't remember the exact words, but along the lines of there's really two separate kinds of verification here. One is to verify that your passport is correct. And that verification is you verify the signature, you verify the JWT claims constraint. And a passport that meets those requirements is verified. The second thing is to verify integrity of this, external content or whatever. And that's something that you would only do if you've already verified the passport, but also only do if you need to care about that integrity. So I think I had better words around this in the email, but the general idea, I think, is to actually divide this up into two steps where and the dependency is only one way, right? So verification of the passport itself is not dependent in any way on the integrity being correct. All it does is verify that, hey, this RCDI hash value is the value they put in. And then you have a separate step, which does depend on having a verified passport, which is the integrity check itself.
John?
The last sentences here are trying to say roughly that, Ben, in the sense of, because it's talking about full verification versus something else, right? And like, I'm a little hesitant, to figure out how we want to draw the line on this. And this is like a fundamental ambiguity in stir shaking that's been around forever, right? Of what it really means for this thing to be verified and what you're supposed to do with it. I think the interesting part of RCD is that it's kind of more actionable than some of the previous ways that we've talked about verification in a pre-RCD environment, where like, it used to be, it's just kind of like, okay, if the call is verified, then it goes into carrier policy engines or people translate into verstats or whatever. This more fundamental question of, are these links in it going to be rendered to users? Are they safe to be rendered to users and to like show up on their display on their mobile device when they're being alerted? I mean, we don't want to be prescriptive about that, though, for the same reason we don't tend to be prescriptive about what you're supposed to do when you decide something is verified. So, I mean, I think this, in some ways, this is just a semantic, question, what we consider to be verification or full verification, or do we want to split it into an explicit stage 1 and stage 2? But, I think where the difference is material is that question of, are we recommending, or at least are we considering these URLs to be safe to render to a user if policy allows that? And like that may be a place to draw that distinction that I at least understand what it's supposed to mean. Because, I mean, just kind of saying, well, we've got a couple different things that verification could mean, and carriers do with that what you will, or whatever, I'm not sure is appropriate for where we're going with our CDI.
Yeah, I think the crux of the issue for me, which, or at least the part that I struggle with, is you know, if I'm signing a call and you know, maybe my telephone number is correct, but, you know, I send a logo that's obviously trying to scam people. Is it right to look at that? You know, are you looking at the total picture there of verified, or, you know, are you saying only, well, the telephone number passes, so it's okay? That's the part I struggle with. I think if you're sending any information, you have to look at it holistically, but go ahead. I think Ben was next.
So I think we're falling into a semantic trap when we talk about partial verification or full verification or any of that sort of thing. And I can understand your point about, you know, whether we should consider a passport to be verified if it's got obvious bad acting going on. But I think those are two things that are separate. I think a evil passport that is properly signed and hits all the JWT claim constraints is valid. If a operator or whoever wants to make other policy decisions based on the contents, they certainly can. But, and I don't think we're necessarily on different pages when it comes to how we expect people to behave or what we expect to be allowed. But I think we fall into a semantic trap that's going to really confuse people if we're not careful here. And that's why I'm trying and proposing that integrity verification is not part of passport verification at all. They are two distinctly separate things. What passport verification does is verify the contents of the passport and the signature, etc. Then what you do with the contents of the passport are up to your policy. And here's this thing that you should be using if you're paying attention to this logo, if you're going to use this logo.
But I guess this is my fear. Can I just quick comment? My fear is that people won't take the integrity stuff seriously, and you'll have a middle box that gives a shaken attestation A based on the phone number, and people are going to pass rich call data, and they're not going to check the integrity, and therefore it's going to be a huge security hole because people are going to pass whatever logos they want, and it's not going to get verified on the other side.
Well, if they do that, then whoever is using that logo is doing it wrong. And I'm already hearing use cases of people talking about this idea that the originating carrier gets the RCD passport signed by a delegate certificate and uses it only for attribution purposes because that's all they care about. And then they pass that passport on to the terminating side, and it's entirely up to the terminating side to verify the RCD parts. And that seems like a valid use case. And that's, you know, the kind of thing we need to be careful not to preclude.
Right, but that's why I care about the text being more specific to verification really means both passport validation and integrity check. So that,
and I argue that it does not.
But what do you say to the case that I just mentioned, that you ignore integrity and, you know, the passport gets validated fine?
Chris, if the end entity is ignoring integrity, then you might as well give up, because like the middle boxes cannot protect against a malicious actor in that position, because all the malicious actor has to do is provide the right thing to those middle boxes and the malicious thing to the end entity. Like that's easy to do. So there is essentially.
But isn't that what I'm saying in this text, that the end entity should consider only verification if integrity and passport is verified? But the cases that you're talking about, the middle box scenarios, the originating service provider, you know, if all it cares about is doing shaken verification on the telephone number, it doesn't have, it doesn't have to check the logos. It can give a attestation, etc. So I want to stay strong on the endpoint that needs to verify everything, but recognize that there is some middle box scenarios where you don't have to do the full verification. I think that's exactly what that text says.
Yes, I think the thing is that this doing the integrity verification is very important, but doing it correctly is also, you have to do it right. And middle boxes can actively cause harm by doing integrity verification. And I feel like frequently the verification service is not the thing that is actually rendering the things at the URLs, which means the integrity is quite separate. And like in my view, the thing in the passport, like the text of the URLs is what the passport is verifying, and like the contents of what of what's at those URLs is so vague and indistinct that like the only thing that can realistically do that is the thing at the end. And so it should be more explicit, like that is the only thing that should be doing anything, and everything else should ignore it, because everything in the middle is going to break things if they do.
I'm happy to clarify that. I mean, I understand there's some cases where a terminating provider might verify it and then convert it into something else, and hopefully that is all over a secure channel. There's some that where it might just all get sent. I recognize that, but the verification service that, like you said, that's actually retrieving the URL and actually going to render it in a trusted space because it did the entire verification. That's the thing that we're talking about, and maybe that's the thing I can clarify in the text. That I don't disagree with.
So I'm jumping in as chair real quick.
Yeah.
Since we've only got 8 minutes left and another topic, and we're likely to wrap on this around this I suggest that those people who are carrying, which sounds like it's Chris and me and Jack, get together offline with some email and see if we can come up with some text we agree with and present it back to the list. Did anyone object to that?
Don't we have an hour and 8 minutes?
We only have a total of an hour, I think.
Yeah, we have a 1 hour slot.
I thought we had 2. Okay.
Eric?
If someone has something new to say about it, Eric, if you have something new to say, please go ahead.
So I was going to say that, but I was wrong.
Okay. Let me check what's on my last slide. I think that's fine. We can meet offline and propose some text on the list. Okay, yeah, that was it anyways. So hopefully we've gone through all the issues. I think we've gone through it pretty exhaustively, but if there's anything else, we can also talk about that on the list as well. But would like to start wrapping up and heading back into working group last call if possible.
So it sounds like we should switch to messaging. And Chris, thanks for putting up with us for this.
Anytime, it's a great discussion.
Okay. So, stir messaging. We're gonna do this real quick. So there was an update to the STIR messaging draft. For those of you that are just joining us on this one, this is looking at providing STIR protection for a set of use cases for either real-time text session negotiation, which encompasses things like RCS, as well as kind of sending individual messages. Why are we doing this? Because message spam is becoming a big problem, and really it seems to make little sense to develop like a separate PKI for messaging that is using telephone numbers when we've already built the stuff out for STIR. But this is, just to be clear, it's kind of speculative work in the sense that although there's some interest in exploring this, it's not like, you know, the text messaging ecosystem is incredibly diverse and filled with lots of legacy cruft that never touches SIP and would be very difficult for us to arrogate to ourselves. But we still think, especially given some of the FCC's recent comments about this problem, that we should have a story for it, for how it will work with STIR. As I suggested, there's kind of like two paths. You know, you can obviously negotiate with SDP, any kind of media stream security that you would like, using mechanisms that look a lot like our SIP Brandy stuff, which was devised for voice, but basically all the same principles would apply to negotiating an MSRP session or something like it. And then there's individual message security. Brian will tell us that this is useful for some emergency services applications. Our proposal is basically to protect these messages at the MIME level, to have a message digest that will cover them. And that will become part of a new message eye, very similar to RCDI, element that will appear in passports that are of this new message PowerPoint type. We've really put this as a pretty pat answer. We're just like, we're going to do MIME level security for whatever's in the message. Like, we're going to protect it at the MIME level. It's kind of a pat answer, but at least thus far, we haven't encountered too many roadblocks around that. So what else is new in this version? We added some security and privacy considerations, a lot of that just referencing the numerous other places that we've discussed this. We added a little bit of text about message conferencing. This is one of the longer poles in the tent when you look at something like MSRP. Of course, we've endlessly studied centralized and decentralized conferencing applications for SIP. We do know we'll need connected identity for that. And my current proposal is basically to kick most of the work that would need to be done to make that into the connected identity draft itself as that goes forward, and kind of leave this as a pretty simple draft that just kind of provides the tools that implementers can go kick around and see if it looks like it might be useful. I did add some text on CPIM. Ben, pointed out in the list that, there are some applications that use CPIM in particular for metadata, and that this is an area where we need to get some input from implementers. I mean, my high-level intuition would be that if we're protecting the entire MIME body, if that provided that CPIM metadata is encoded as a MIME body that will accompany a message, then we get it for free. And if it's metadata that is being protected in a message stream, we also should get it for free. But I mean, Ben, is there some reason that might not be true from what you understand of this? And I know that we need to dig into this like before we, before we make a decision about it.
I don't know that I have an answer to that question. The only comment I had is there is a discussion of this somewhat in the 85. I can't remember the draft that Russ and I did a while back, or FCA Russ and I did a while back.
Yeah.
But
and
as far as
we do reference that in the spec.
Right. But the CPM discussion goes further than what is mentioned in this. The big concern I have is that there were at least some cases where it appeared that intermediaries were adding things like timestamps and such into the CPM headers, which could break integrity if we were doing the whole message.
No, definitely. So we have 1 minute left in the published agenda without Ecker.
Hey, John. I think this is like great to see you working on this. Can you talk a little bit about what you think the relationship with MLS is? Obviously, these are all in the same space, and it would really be nice if there was a way, if there wasn't a breakpoint between SMS or SMS style stuff and other messaging applications.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we could largely get MLS for free as well, in the sense of this is just telling you use STIR credentials, right? Like you use STIR certs as your trust anchors for like MLS, right? And but I mean, we had a few discussions about this earlier, and there weren't a lot of takers in this room on that. But if you have some thoughts on that, love to discuss. Happy to put some text in. I don't think that expertise is in this room to ascertain like what the interaction is with MLS.
Maybe maybe the draft, and I can circle back later or bring Richard in as a possibility, because I think it would still be good to future-proof this a little bit for that purpose. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan?
This clearly would be useful to us in emergencies. We treat MSRP is what we actually use, and it's treated like a call and has all the same spam and swatting issues that we have with calls. And if we lock down calls and we don't lock down messages, that's just a vector for people to exploit. So we'd really like to have this. We do use MSRP, and we gateway SMS to MSRP. That's been done for quite a while now. So MSRP would work for us as long as we can, effectively get the right thing to happen on the other end at the gateway with SMS, and that's a signaling problem, right? That's SS7 and all that mess. But with respect to SIP, if it's SIP all the way, we're okay. This would be really useful to us.
Cool. Chris?
I was just going to say, gatewaying to MSRP is what happens in the RCS world too. So
yeah,
it'd be too different.
It wouldn't be too different. Ben also raised on the list a question about store and forward, especially for the message side of this, which raises a lot of familiar semantic questions about what it means for a message to be delivered in an immediate texting system like this, as opposed to read. Certainly we can discuss that more. We're now over time. But I mean, one of the main things I wanted to get from people here is if people are cool with us punting largely on conferencing. I think it's worth just having the basic tools out there for implementers to play with and figuring out multi-party messaging later. Does anybody think that's unacceptable, that we actually need to solve multi-party messaging out of the gate for this to be useful?
Well, but if we were to do MLS Bridge, you get mostly for free.
Oh, that'd be nice.
I mean, not entirely free necessarily, but some of the stuff for free. Yeah, like I said, let's circle about this a little bit once I have a chance to really assimilate the draft. And I think also the sort of overall communication model obviously is a question.
It wouldn't be a problem for emergency services. That's done inside, and the user, although might be aware of multi-party, from its point of view, it's a unicast line going out that has stuff done to it. That's probably not stable for a very long time. That is where we are now, because nobody implements multi-party MSRP in any particularly great way right now. If that happened, so that we started doing chat with MSRP in deployed systems, then our opinion would change. But right now, it's not a big deal, and punting it is fine.
I mean, anything that uses centralized conferencing that can actually proxy through a passport, and the passport will still validate on the other side of it, I think will be fine. It's just a question of anything that has to munge that I'm worried about, and whether your desk needs to contain your total target set at the start, or whether those are the things. And there's actually some considerations I did put into this draft about that point in particular.
Okay,
Chris.
Yeah, John and I talked about this, but I think it's probably better. I think it's something we can do and probably can do sooner rather than later. But I think just from the industry swallowing things, it might be good just for this document to keep it simple, and then maybe have something separate that considers conferencing scenarios more generally. And maybe MLS is another case to consider. That could be part of that whole framework also.
Cool.
We are out of time.
We are out of time. I think we're, again, if we're not going to do any major surgery, and MLS, hopefully wouldn't be major surgery, I think we're pretty close to working the last call here. Why don't I circle around with Richard? Richard, I was seeing you in the text there in the chat, and Ecker a bit on what we might want to do to just at least draw a line for this would be the basic principles you're going to use MLS with this. But, to Ben's point in the chat and what I said earlier, this is getting some attention at the moment. Like the FCC is turning their baleful gaze to messaging because the problem is becoming quite a bit worse in the US at the moment. And again, I would just hate to see somebody try to completely reinvent the wheel around this for telephone number based, messaging when we have the stir shaken PKI, like now, not just, widely deployed, but like in constant use for telephone calls at the moment. So, and with that, I will be done.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for your time and attendance today. And we'll be getting back together soon, I imagine.
Thank you.
Take care.